I can share my screen if you'd like. So moving on. So today's about left hand patterns and how left hand patterns are an awesome thing for a variety of reasons. I'm going to start off by just explaining a little bit about what left hand patterns are and mean to me. And then I'm going to show you a few examples of left hand patterns. And then we are going to write a mini piece using left hand patterns, or at least a first draft, you can say. So, left hand patterns, in my mind, are basically a short idea, maybe one or two measures, a short rhythmic idea. It has a certain direction of the notes and certain intervals that go an approximate distance up or down, and they get put on repeat. That's what makes a left hand pattern. So something like we start on a low note for a quarter note, and then we go to two higher notes for a half note. And then if we put that together on repeat, it sounds like a waltz pattern. And so on repeat, there's a left hand pattern for you. And so now what's the point of a left hand pattern? From a theoretical perspective, it captures the mood, the style, and more often than not, the harmonies of the piece that you'd like to compose. And why would you want to use it? From a composer perspective, pretty much if you use a left-hand pattern, you only have to write those two measures, and then you practically have the whole piece written. All you have to choose is the harmonies and the melody, basically. And so it makes it super easy to write a whole piece when you just come up with one single left-hand pattern. And then from a performer's perspective, it's nice to play left-hand patterns, because left-hand patterns make the piece sound bigger and sound more complex without really making it that much harder. Because once you get those first couple measures down, it just becomes easier. Repetition makes things easier. So it kind of feels a little bit like cheating in a way, because it seems too easy, and it seems like for the performer and for the composer. But I want to show you a couple of examples of famous composers using left-hand patterns, just to prove a point that if the famous composers are allowed to use left-hand patterns, so can you. And so let's go back in time to the Baroque era with Bach. And even Bach used some patterns. And now this one I'm going to show you, it's not written for left hand only, but it could be. And I'm going to prove it by playing that. I'm going to play it only with my left hand. This is the Bach Prelude in C from the Prelude and Fugue, BWV 846. And I know some of you are probably cringing because I used pedal, but that's a no-no in Bach. But and so you could even throw a melody on top of that if you wanted. And all of a sudden, we've got a beautiful left-hand pattern written by Bach. And of course, that pattern, basically what it was doing was it started on the bottom of a chord, and it just went up through the different chord tones. So the first one was a C major chord, so it went from a C, skipped up to the next chord to an E, skipped tone to G, and then the next one C, next one E. and then it skipped past a chord tone to go to, instead of going down to C, it skipped all the way down to G and then back up. So that's the Baroque era, an example. If we skip ahead to the classical period, there's quite a few more recognizable patterns that start to emerge. And the most famous one that I'm sure all of you know is the Alberti Base. And the Alberti Base, it starts on the base of a chord, oftentimes the root. Actually, I take that statement back. Not oftentimes the root, but it does start on the base of the chord, skips past the chord tone, jumps down to the middle chord tone, and then goes back up to the top chord tone, just like this. And that was a C major chord. We went C, G, E, G. And you may recognize it in this example, which is the Mozart sonata in C major. So a little bit of Mozart. And I think this is also a pretty good example of, in my head, there's sort of two different types of ways to go about writing left-hand patterns. One being a directly transferable pattern, and one being going from chord to chord with good voice leading. And so, I'll share my screen for this so I can just show you real quick. So like in this case, we played, look at the bottom of the screen, we played, that was your C chord, and when we went to the 5 chord, Mozart did this. Of course, leaving out the B in that chord, but that was good voice leading, so it still implied the 5 chord, but all of the notes in the next chord were very close by. If it was a directly transferred chord, it would sound something like this. So notice each chord was in root position and the root was in the bass. And so both are fine, and it just depends on, whether you want to make that stronger impact or whether you want it to sound pretty smooth. And sometimes the style genre can hint at which one you should choose. So then moving on to the Romantic era, the king of left-hand patterns, Chopin. I'm going to show you an example from him. I personally love the left-hand patterns in the Nocturnes. I think they're very unique, very creative, and especially the first one, the Nocturne in B-flat minor, which starts off with an open-voiced chord. So it goes root, skips up to the 5th, skips up to the 10th, or you can say 3rd, depending on how you think about it, and then down to the root, skips past a chord tone, and then jumps an octave down. And then what's really interesting in this one in particular is in the next chord that is implied, there's a 5/7 chord, but in the bass, Chopin keeps the pedal tone of B flat. And so it sounds like this. Beautiful. I love pedal tones. They're my favorite compositional device. So here's what this sounds like all together. I'm sure you know it. Literally one of my favorite pieces. I love it. And so then moving on. Now, from the modern period, from now, instead of showing you some weird, what's his name? I can't think, the name's not coming to mind. I'm going to show you an example from a pedagogical composer. Now, pedagogical composers, including myself, are probably the most guilty of using left-hand patterns because it we all know our students want to play they want to play pieces that tend to be much easier than they sound, and it's a win for the studio. And so I went to my shelf, my bookshelf with all my books, and I picked just a random pedagogical composer book off the shelf, turned to a random page in it, and voila, left-hand pattern. And so the composer I chose was Kevin Olson, and it was from the book Imaginations, let's see, level 3, book 3. And the pattern that I opened to was, sorry, the piece that I opened to was called High 5, which is called that because the time signature is in 5/4. So even in 5/4, you can have a really interesting left-hand pattern. I think it's really cool what he did in here, though, because he had a hidden melody in the bass, and so it was maybe a little less about the harmony, the chords that were being applied, and more about the harmony that I liked about this. So it sounds like this. So you can hear the hidden melody in the bass notes of that left-hand pattern. Very cool stuff. So I want to move on now, and I just wanted to quickly show you some examples, get you in the mindset that it's okay to use left-hand patterns, and they really can make the piece really, really interesting and capture the mood that you want. And so now let's move on, and I want you to notice, take a look at actually, let's see. Does everyone have this printed out? Does anyone not have this printed out? So some of you with your cameras off, do you? Okay, I think everyone has it. So since everyone has it, I don't think you know what? I'll do it anyway. I'll share my screen. Why not? And so, okay, so we can see the basic left-hand patterns over here, although I know you've got it in front of you. Now, in this packet, I want to emphasize that the first page is the patterns that I have seen the most often. These are sort of the basic versions of the most common patterns I've experienced. I've seen in a lot of different places. And of course, there are many different variations of these patterns, but in their most simple form, this is kind of what I've seen before. And so if you take a look ahead in the packet, these are some examples of, like, okay, well, I said there were variations. I said I've seen these in some way, shape, or form. And so you'll see for each one of the examples. So for example, for the stride bass, which started off with like this, which we went, all these, oh, by the way, all of these are going from a 1 chord to a 4 chord of some sort. So here's your 1 chord in C major. And then we went directly transferred to the F chord instead of doing with good voice leading. And so we went root, upper chord tones, down to the 5th, upper chord tones, and same thing. Now, if we take a look at the first variation of that, I call this Camel Ride. These are just names I made up. There's not actually, this isn't just an official theory term that I read in a book. So to make it sound like you're riding a camel, instead of just going back and forth, you can take that second beat and turn it into eighth notes like this. Notice I also, in this example, instead of doing a direct transfer, I did that good voice leading. And so I went to a 4 chord, but I kept the common tones, which in this case, like the C was the common tone, and then I moved the other notes up. So you can take a look through these patterns on your own to see, to make the connections. Like, did I add extra rhythms here? Did I take rhythms away? Did I add some extra chord tones, some non-chord tones to the pattern? Any hidden melodies? Those kinds of things. If you take a look ahead to one page, though, I do want to emphasize variations don't necessarily mean that you have to make it harder. You can also, for the sake of your students, you can make it easier. And so in that same pattern, just as an example, instead of adding to it, I took away what I felt was less important to the pattern, which was those upper chord tones. And so it still felt like stride to me just by doing the bass notes like this. Still had that sort of hokey walking sound. And so, take a look at those for that kind of example. And of course, if you have an advanced student, you really can go in and make it really challenging. And so, if you take a look at like the ballad, for example, instead of just a simple, instead of something like this, which I think was the original one that I had on page 1 or something like that, which passed through a non-chord tone, turned it into some. Can I even play this? Let's see. There we go. Okay, so I had to work out a fingering on the spot. And so that's the ballad. You might have heard something like that, and let's say what's that name of that Chopin piece? The Etude. Da-dum, ba-dum, ba-bum, ba-ba-dum, ba-bum, ba-ba. That's a Chopin like riff right there. So we have all these patterns. Now what I want you to do is, and I'm glad most of you are at a piano right now, I'm going to give you just a minute to play through. We're just going to, for the sake of making things a little simple today, I want to just pick one of the patterns from the first page. And so go ahead and on your piano, play around with those and pick one that you find to be the most interesting. And I'll give you a minute to just work that out, and then, yeah, I see more people have went to their piano, so that's cool. And then if you're not at a piano, just sit patiently, or you feel free to ask me any questions in the meantime while those who are playing are playing.
Christopher, I've got a question for you.
Yeah.
When you talked about doing 2 measures that repeat as a easy way to, as you're writing your song and you do the melody added to it, do you ever do the very first measure you've chosen the pattern for twice and then changing it to, or is it always alternating, every measure alternating?
I don't know what you mean by alternating, but yeah, sometimes I do the pattern 2 measures in a row. Oftentimes I do, actually.
Okay, so you're not doing 1 measure and then you instantly go into the 4 chord.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. There's because especially sometimes it can be really challenging to change that quickly for some of these patterns. Mm-hmm. And some of the patterns, I realized not many of the ones that I have on here last for 2 measures. So you probably can, you can. So if you took like, let's see. So if you took like the battle. Well, if you took ballad, for example, here's a good one. So if you took the ballad, for example, you can easily turn that into a 2-measure pattern by doing something like this. So you can go, instead of like this, which is 1 measure. Well, first off, if you write it with instead, if you write all of those as quarter notes and you're in 4/4 instead of eighth notes, then all of a sudden you've got a 2-measure pattern. But then if you still are doing eighth notes, and you could do something a little bit more complex like this, So you can riff a little bit longer, and then that becomes a two measure pattern. But oftentimes they're they can that's like the longest I would personally make a left hand pattern. Good question though. All right, so does everyone have? Does anyone need more time? Everyone got a pattern picked, we think. Okay, so we're gonna put that off to the side for a second. Hold that thought, and keep your pattern that you chose off to the side, and then take out the this sheet, the sample size, and and of course, hopefully you have a pencil. And what I would love for you to do is outline 16 measures. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And for now, maybe just keep it bass and treble clef, bass in the bottom staff and treble in the top staff. And if you want to do any different time signature, all of these patterns can be adjusted to fit any time signature. So you can cut off, for example, like with the ballad style, you can cut off a little bit to make it 3/4 instead of 4/4. And then I'll just wait to see some eyes for when you're finished with setting up that little template. All right, we got a decent amount of eyes looking up. So then what we want to do next, and this is not always how I go about composing, but just for the sake of today, we're gonna actually start with the harmonies. We're gonna figure out the harmonies first, and then plug in the pattern. So let's do. But before we actually choose the harmony, it's helpful to decide the form. And so when I mention form, I'm talking a little bit more about phrase structure here. And so very often we can do since we only have 16 measures, there's not much we can do. Usually in the case of 16 measures, I'm going to zoom in here for a second. We usually start with, we have to start with an A phrase, unless you want to start with an intro, but let's just start with an A phrase. And then in the next line, let's just assume that we're going to go, we can either go A, B, A, or we can go A, B, prime. And so for now, just pick one of those, A, B on the third line, A on the last line, or A, B. Go ahead and just throw the dice, choose one, whatever it is. And if we end up wanting to go back and change it later, that's fine. And so why are we doing this? Because that's going to be helpful in deciding what harmonies you're going to use. More than likely, if you're whatever key signature, so you should choose a key signature that you like. It can be major or minor, or atonal if you're feeling that. And then more than likely you're going to end on the one chord. So like I just was doing this in C for fun, and I chose C as my last chord. And because it's a prime, B prime, that means that the first time I do B, I don't have the B phrase. I don't have to end on a C chord. I can end on something else. And so now you can choose one chord per measure, or just like I did over here, you can choose one chord per every two measures. So just like um, the question that was asked before. So can you do two? Can you do the pattern for two measures? Yes. And so in this case, I chose the rock pattern, which is why I called my piece "Rocky Terrain." And I find this pattern to be something that is a little bit more difficult to switch quickly. So I did it for two measures instead of just one. And unfortunately, because of the time constraint today, I can't go into detail about harmonies that will sound good, like progressions. So that'll have to be a topic for another day. But choose the chords that you think will sound the nicest, and write yourself a little bit of a lead sheet. And then, of course, for your B phrase, you want to choose different harmonies. So I just chose C, the one chord, G, the five chord for my A phrases, and then for my B phrases here, I chose the sixth chord A minor, and in the middle I went to the four chord F. And for the B prime phrase, I did that same thing. I went from the sixth chord, the A minor, to the F chord, but because it's a prime, I can end a little bit differently. I went to C. So what this is going to sound like, what my example is going to sound like altogether, is this. And so if I just play the left hand pattern with those implied chords, and because it's just open octaves, there's not really chords in there, so there's not much to do. It's going to sound something like this. Oh, yeah. I can end maybe slightly differently, have a little bit longer of a rhythm in there. And if I did the same thing with, let's say, a waltz pattern, it might sound like this. I won't play the whole thing this time, but if I did the same chords, but I chose a waltz pattern, it would sound like this. Or if I did it with good voice leading, it would sound like this. That's really just like sticking very true to keeping the common tones. So um, let's have you now plug in your left hand patterns to the chords that you chose. Go ahead and practice it for a bit, and then I'm going to have one or two of you play, and we'll see how we can shape that left hand pattern, change it up a little bit in order to get closer to what you really want it to feel like. And of course, if you don't feel like you need to write it down, then that's fine too. But if you are having trouble remembering the notes to play, then that's why you have that sheet in front of you, to the staff paper. So I'll give you a minute, practice it, and then I'll come back. We're not focusing on melody quite yet. We'll do that next. After some careful consideration, I changed my own chord progression. Maybe I'll show you later. All right. So, those of you with your camera on, how we doing? Do you need some more time? Raise your hand if you would. Oh, can you hear me? Yes. Raise your hand if you need more time. Cool. All right. So let's dive in and let's see. Um, Valerie, you look like you were ready to go like 10 minutes ago. So I'd love to hear what you came up with your the chords that you chose and the what left-hand pattern did you choose?
Um, right now I've got C, A minor, F, and G for the A, and then A minor and F for the B part.
Sounds good to me. Yeah. And which pattern did you choose from the sheet?
Oh, I'm sorry, wrong thing. Ballad.
Okay, that's the most popular one for sure.
Yeah.
So okay, so have you tried playing it on the piano?
Yes.
Plugging it in. Can we hear what it sounds like?
Sure.
Yeah, round of applause. Excellent. Very cool. So you perfectly applied, and I love that you already started to tweak it a little bit. And so you, I think it was maybe two-thirds of the way through there, you started to add a couple extra rhythms to the pattern. And so instead of just stopping on the half note in there, and so really nice job there. So now I'm gonna push you in a so I'm gonna give you some suggestions here that not really suggestions. We're gonna experiment. That's the word I'm looking for. And so now the reason that you chose. Let's think about the reason that you chose this pattern. Why did you like this pattern?
Because I use it really often and all my teenage girls love it.
Well, okay. And why do you think they love it? What's the what's appealing about it to them?
I think it's easy and yet it's emotional. And it's really easy to vary up, to change up.
Excellent. What kind of emotion are we talking here?
Oh, romance.
Romance. Okay. So notice that what I'm doing here is I'm starting to dig deeper into the abstract about this pattern. Like why, what's the real reason behind here? So the more you dive, so you think it's the romance that they love. And so how can we make this feel even more romantic? What are some things that we can do? So when I think about romance myself, I feel like I am so full of love. The word "full of love," full in the phrase "full of love" is the word that I would feel that most applies to this pattern. And so maybe what I might do in this, if you want to, hmm, let's see. How can we make it sound more full? Well, adding maybe some lower notes in there might make it sound a little bit bigger. And so if we do something like this, let's see. I'll share my screen. So you might consider if to make it sound a little bit more full, we might do something like this. You might start a little bit lower to give it a bit bigger of a sound, or you might take the pattern and just expand in both directions. So like you started here. Maybe you might do something like you know what you did at the end there? You added an extra harmony. What if you do that for the whole piece?
Okay.
Something like that. So add that extra note for the whole piece, and to me that just adds a little bit more fullness to it, and therefore to me a little bit more romance to it. You might also say romance is a little bit more of a wild ride. So you might consider adding some different rhythms in there to spice it up. So instead of very steady rhythms like this, you might do, let's see. Just off the top of my head, you might add a little bit of a little flutter like that. You could say that it represents the heart fluttering, and while you're feeling in love or romantic. So just little edits like that after you think really hard about like, well, why? And so very nice. And do you want to try one of those yourself real quick before I go on to the next victim?
No, I want to think about it.
Okay, sounds good. All right, so then now let's pick somebody else, and we're going to do something a little bit different. First, I do want to hear the pattern first, but let's see. Christian, are you near a piano?
Not quite. I can move to a piano.
Don't worry about it. We'll just go to someone who's at a piano already. And
I'm at a piano. I'll do mine.
Okay, awesome.
Okay, so I did A minor, F, D, and G. So hear this. Basically.
Excellent. And I think you might have the original sound seems to be turned off, so it's cutting in a little bit. I think what you did was did you choose the rock pattern?
I chose the rock.
Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and just play. I'm gonna play again what you just played, so everyone can hear a little bit clearer. And so bum bum bum.
A, F.
Okay, so it should sound something like this. In other words.
G.
Huh?
G. And
Oh, G. Sorry. And it would sound really cool if you went to G sharp after that.
Yeah.
So very nice. There's your rock pattern. Now here, you're gonna try something. You're gonna pretend to be my student here for a second. And so when I'm working with my students on practicing writing a melody with their left hand pattern, it can sometimes be a pretty tricky thing because there's already so much going on in the left hand, and so to on the spot try and figure out what to do with the right hand can be a little disorienting. And so if your student is less comfortable with improvising, or if you are less comfortable with improvising, then there's two approaches that can make it a little bit easier to coming up with a melody. And again, I wish I had more time to talk about what makes a good melody, but again, that's time for another conversation. So, but we will practice. What we're going to do right now is two different practice methods of how to come up with a melody with your left hand pattern. So one approach is to simplify the left hand pattern, literally just play the chords that you wrote, and while you're holding that for, let's say you're in 4/4 time, while you're holding that for 4 beats per measure, you can focus more so on writing the melody in the other hand. So the left hand is not more complicated. So it'll be something like this. And so much easier to come up with a melody on the spot if your left hand's not doing something else. Why don't you try something like that real quick?
There we go. Yes. But let's see, where am I? G sharp. I know this.
That's the idea, though. Okay, no, that's
that's
fine. Excellent. All right,
Helpful.
so very, very nice. So it really makes it a little bit easier to start thinking about the right hand in that. So I'm gonna hop on to one more person real quick for the other method, but one more round of applause. Excellent job. Loving it. And then let's see. So Nancy, you've got your camera on. You're near what looks like a beautiful piano. Can you unmute yourself? All right. Hello.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes. And so let's see. Can I hear what you came up with? Just a little sample, maybe the first few measures.
I was doing the ballad.
Hey, yeah, awesome. Okay, and you had some different twists on there that were really nice, and just like Valerie, you took after a few times you were like, it's getting a little bit old. I need to do something with it. That was really really nice. And so at some points where you felt like it needed more tension, you went a little bit higher. Now, let's say your left hand's doing that. We need to come up with a right hand part. So one way is to simplify the left hand and just play the chords. And now the other way, if you are less comfortable or your student is less comfortable with coming up with a melody on the spot, is to simplify the rhythms in the right hand first. And so while you're playing your left hand pattern, only play one note every time beat one hits. And so when you have so in other words, it might sound something like this. So notice I played I think I missed one beat one, but for the most part, that's the idea. You want to try that?
I don't know.
That's the right idea. Excellent. Perfect. There we go. And of course, yes, perfect. Exactly what I was looking for. Then if you want to start to gradually increase the difficulty from there, you can choose a different beat to play on. You can only play on beat 2, for example. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Try it out. Excellent. Fantastic. And of course, we can keep going from there. I'm not going to make you play again, so round of applause. And so you can keep going with this and adding a little bit on at a time with the right hand rhythm. So maybe play on beat 1 and beat 2, and then maybe play on beat 2 and beat 3, or maybe at some point when they start to get comfortable with the simple rhythms, you can say, you know what, just go for it now. Because after a while, I notice once they get comfortable with playing around on the different beats, then they start to feel, oh, okay, I get it. My left hand's on automatic. It's on autopilot now. So I think that, we moved really quickly today, and that's awesome. Does anyone else want to share, or do we want to go straight to questions? I think we're going to move to questions then in that case. So we got a good like 50 minutes in there. So what do you got for me? What do we want to talk about? Because I think that's the gist.
Okay, I had to figure out where my space bar was to unmute just for a minute. So just when we started this, the idea hit me that, a lot of times I think right hand, you come up with your melody first, but so you could actually start with your left hand first and get basically an accompaniment. Is that true, or am I thinking wrong?
Yeah, no, that's entirely true. Yeah, and you know what? That's why I said like a lot of times I start from a different angle, and I will start with a melody, or I'll start with just like you attended my other session. I'll start with the emotion or the story or something like that and go from there. But looks like someone's joining now. I wonder if they got the time wrong. So yeah, I would start with you can start with the left hand, in other words. And sometimes it's actually nice to do that, because if you start with a melody, sometimes you might not come up with as interesting of harmonies, for example. Or you might not come up with an interesting accompaniment part. You'll be restricted in other areas. And so on that note, I guess I would further encourage you to try starting from all the different elements. And so sometimes start from harmony, sometimes start from melody, sometimes come up with a really unique rhythm first, and sometimes start with a cool texture, or even what are the other elements here? The start by thinking about the articulations or the dynamics, what you can do that's really cool with that, and then run from there. Mm-hmm.
So I just a thought, you could probably make little pieces of paper with each of those on there, and you could go to your students and say, pick one. Okay, this is where we're starting. Let's think of a story that, just all the different things.
Yeah, that you can start from really any angle. You could, like you said, you could start from that abstract angle. That's my favorite. I love starting from the more abstract angle, like starting with a story, because I feel that starting with a story can really lead to some of the most interesting sounds on the piano. And when I think about left-hand patterns in particular, if we want to compare them to stories, left-hand patterns, whenever I use a left-hand pattern, it's more about like it sets, like I said before, it sort of sets a mood or a style. It feels almost more like background music to me, and then the melody comes in to paint the picture a little bit more clearly, or you can say like the sound effects. But that's just a side note. Cool questions, yeah. Any other topics you guys want to raise or questions you had during this process?
I just realized there's a pattern you're missing.
Which
I
one?
want to know, because I ride horses. What's the pattern? We're missing the cowboy.
Oh yeah. Well, see, that one actually I view as something very similar to the boogie. And so it's got that rock back and forth sound to it. Like I said, that all of these are very common patterns, and then there's variations of these patterns, and that to me is like a variation of the boogie pattern. Very fun. Well, if there are no more questions, then I say thank you all for joining me today, and I hope that I've inspired you a bit to use these left-hand patterns or something similar, start creating. It just really makes life so easy if you want to just bust out pieces, if you want to impress your student, if you want to impress yourself. And so now if you, I just want to let you know quick that I have been giving a free piece away every month. And if you want those free pieces, it's a great you can just give it to your students, or you can analyze it, see what's going on inside my head. I've been giving them away to my email subscribers. If you go to oillpianouniverse.com, OILL pianouniverse.com, there's a big subscribe button at the very top, and then you'll get that free piece every month.